Joining me now here on the Knicks Film School pregame show with the Knicks taking on the New Orleans Pelicans on Friday night down in New Orleans. The game doesn't matter, and you're all going to overreact to it one way or another, as we saw from Wednesday night's postgame. So I decided to let you have your fun and to let people enjoy things and allow you all to go ahead and do that, but to not preview that game. And instead, we're going to go out to Texas, deep in the heart of Texas, and preview the game that actually does matter to Knicks fans, especially if you want them to make a draft pick this season. The Chicago Bulls take on the Dallas Mavericks on Friday night in Dallas. And joining me to preview this game and just talk about what has happened to this franchise that made the Western Conference Finals last year with the Dallas Mavericks, it's Grant Afseth of DallasBasketball.com. Grant, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. There's a lot to talk about for sure.
So let's start about what happened the other night. Before they went ahead and beat the Kings in a very impressive victory, Mark Cuban became available to the media, and you were in the media scrum. Were you there for that, for those comments when they were made?
Yeah, I was there. I wasn't there for that purpose. I was there to record Kyrie Irving's pregame because he's always there like 2.5, 3 hours before. So, but then Mark Cuban and his son were shooting around. Then he sat courtside, and then all of a sudden, reporters start trickling in, and then it's a media thing. So, yeah, that was definitely interesting for sure.
Do you get the sense that the Cuban... Well, so I guess, again, I haven't heard the comments, so this has got maybe a bad job by me. So you being in the interaction, actually seeing what his emotions and what he actually might have intentionally meant in the context, was he just kind of explaining? Was it like a throwaway line, like, oh yeah, his dad got involved and then we lost him? Or was it actually
it was still the focus?
So he's very much snake bitten still by what happened last summer, and he's blaming. It sounded like to me, from my perspective, that he's really pointing to that as the beginning of the trickle down effect of what happened this season. Is that fair?
Very, very much so. It was like in the middle of comments or questioning. The Jalen Brunson thing was a big focus because the day before, Tim McMahon had asked Luka after practice about how much do you guys miss JB, and then he was like kind of like a awkward painful smile. He was just like, a lot. Then it was like. That was the start of it all. So, then the next day, I think that's probably why he did this, that Mark Cuban did this, to kind of answer and probably give their side of the story, which, I have a lot of issues with that side of the story. So, I think it was definitely the focus, though, because it was a lot like when the parent got involved. And then it was like, here are text exchanges from our side with Rick Brunson and all that stuff. So it was definitely, Rick Brunson was the catalyst, if you will, and the side of the story.
Yeah, it was a weird look, from my perspective, to be like an owner is going out and doing this. Like, he will eventually want to sign another free agent, and I'm sure an agent is going to remember this. They're like, oh, so private conversations get brought to the public if you don't get the guy that you want. You mentioned the issues that you have with that side. Do Dallas fans, do Mavericks fans, they look at this situation and more side with him? Do they feel bitter over last summer? Or are they more upset with him that you had the chance to extend him, you had the chance to match him, and they're just more upset that they let him get away?
I think definitely the latter. I think there was multiple chances for that 4-year, $55.6 million, whatever the exact figure was, to get a deal done. And I think, with how accurate I would say the reporting has been over the last calendar year with that situation, I feel like the full perspective has been there. So the fans, most people would know who are in tune with the reporting would know that he had a disappointing playoff appearance against the Clippers. Maybe they didn't have the confidence in him to do that deal. And then, when he was ready to still do it, they wanted to keep his trade eligibility open because that's a big thing around Dallas is the idea of hitting home runs at almost any given time when there's a possibility of hitting a home run with a big acquisition or midseason change. And that's why Dorian Finney-Smith also he didn't do his deal until after the trade deadline. And, I think people realize that stuff. And they're like, we probably should have just like, instead of looking off into the stars, we probably should have just taken care of business in front of our face and gotten a deal done. And he already outplayed it by the time they circled back, is my understanding. And the rest is history. If I was a free agent or soon to be free agent, and I had like multiple chances to get a much cheaper deal done, and they didn't want to do it at that time, and I had completely outplayed my situation, I would go to New York as well. So that's just my perspective of it for sure.
Yes. As somebody who has greatly benefited both emotionally and obviously just from a basketball standpoint, getting to watch Jalen Brunson this season as they somewhat legally acquired him and negotiated with him last summer. Game one of the first round, I'm sure, had nothing. They're just taking in a basketball game. Julius Randle, the entire Knicks front office.
Big basketball fans.
Yeah, Julius is from Dallas. Just wanted to go see. Yeah, that we've relitigated all of that, and obviously the NBA made their judgment. I want to talk about Luka because his career so far has been so fascinating. There's this ceiling that I don't even know what to completely think of. Like a lot of people have compared him to Harden this season and the way he gets his points and how crafty he is, but like he has more of a low post game. So you wonder if the ceiling's even higher. Host of our show, John Macri, used the words Michael Jordan in a sentence to compare Luka Doncic, which I'm not there, but I at least respect that like this is untapped potential. And yet to see him as the 11th seed in the West, a very, very weak Western Conference, or at least a Western Conference with so much parity, is really confusing. Let me start here. How much responsibility do you think he personally thinks he holds for what's happened this season?
I think there's a fair amount of responsibility because I think, the workload that he had to carry, I think was definitely a factor, but that's not necessarily like, a fault of his. I think part of it was probably like, I think the middle of the season, sometimes it's hard to necessarily maintain like ideal, weight and conditioning through 82 games for some guys who naturally tend to put on some weight if they're not like super careful with that stuff. I'm sure that there's probably some self accountability that I would imagine. Cause he I got to be better on defense. And, I've been exhausted, from playing basketball essentially for like 3 or 4 years straight. Cause the condensed coronavirus, induced calendar for the NBA and the international basketball, he hasn't really had like a full extended time off. So I think that's, he's not going to blame that, but it's like, if you're going to handle that, you have to be really, really like disciplined, focused. And I think anyone would have struggles with that, but like you have to really, really handle that well, with your habits and day-to-day stuff. So I think that's probably where he would see it. I would imagine. But I think, in terms of like the actual, like, I guess build up to when he started to miss games as well. I think that early season load, where the team had a really even against the Knicks, like 60, 20 and 10, like that, he was doing everything. Like I think anybody would probably start breaking down. They were talking about like Jason Kidd had a comment like early in the season, like we are going to be lucky if he makes it to Christmas. If we keep carrying riding him like this. And, so that's where it starts to, you can like do Captain Hindsight stuff where you're like, okay, so you did trade for Kyrie Irving, but also like he was on your list before the season when you made, when he was like requesting a trade. So if you really had like confidence in this move, like why didn't you just do it and have a full training camp and then like see what you needed to plug, midway through with how loaded the West is. So there's like a lot of like ways you could kind of be like, oh my gosh, like, this could have been better. This could have been done differently. And I think not all of it has to do obviously with like Luka's conditioning and all that stuff, but I think that's probably where he would say, he's got to like maximize going forward for sure.
The comment that he recently gave, I want to say it was 2 weeks ago, about just like not experiencing joy. many a Knick fan or an NBA fan might read into that a little more than they should or could. We're always looking for who's the next big star to ask out or to force his way out. Way too early into an extension for me to. I'm not even sure the extension's kicked in yet. For me to go down that path, but as far as just the emotional load that it's had on him this season. Just did he get his joy back at any point? Was he just more like, because we're losing, I'm not enjoying this? And then like as a follow-up, the notion from the Shams Charania report that this team was willing to shut him down and shut Kyrie down and to tank. How much would that have played into the joy that he wasn't experiencing and whether that would have come back?
Yeah, I think a lot of this, I think there was some personal off the court stuff. And I think he even said that it kind of, not his exact words, but just a general sentiment. They got exacerbated by the losing. It's just a lot to, of frustration.
Just real quick, this is something that isn't reported, that it's private and we don't know about?
Yeah. No, okay. People have speculated, but like, he doesn't want to talk about the private stuff because he's asked about it. Yeah. So like, I think it'd be, a little unfair for me to like make guesses and all. So, like not saying you're asking me to, but you know what I mean? Like, no one has a confirmation of like what exactly it is. Like Tim
completely
McMahon
respected.
Said he has an idea of what it could be, but in his reporting, but it hasn't been like an official, like, this is what happened with Luka during the year, like kind of like story or anything of that nature. But I think, I definitely think the tanking stuff, I would imagine like closer to that Indiana game is probably when they were thinking about it. Because it started, losses really started to stack up, like after losing to Charlotte twice in a row. That was after Luka like talked about the, like losing the joy, if you will. But still like, that's a dangerous game to play. Because I think people should, like, I actually have a story coming out like probably within an hour or something like that from now about, just like how risky it is to, like with someone who's so competitive, to even like say the word tanking. Because like, I don't know if like people remember or not, but when, Tim Cato, the Athletic, did a deep dive into, the current like front office situation before they had fired like, Bob Voulgaris. There was a story where he said, Voulgaris left his seat with like a minute left and they were down by like 10. Mm-hmm. And he was like, you quit on us. And he was talking to players in the locker room about it after the game. So it's like, if someone leaving their seat with a minute left and you're down 10 and you still lost was perceived as quitting, like, how is like, and that pissed him off. Like, how is that going to be perceived when the organization quite literally had somebody tell a reporter, we're thinking about telling these two superstars to quit and then just pack it in? Like, I think that's very risky in my opinion. Like that's a lot to do,
And that's the unintentional risk you take when you choose the route of tanking. Like, I have no idea what's going to happen in Portland, but Dame has made it clear that like he has no interest in a rebuild. I wonder, like, just from talking to some people there, like how much he has taken stock in what's happened in New York since the Josh Hart trade and how he's contributed to winning and how they chose like not wanting to extend him over potentially being in part of this play-in race that exists right now. And a guy that was having like, I mean, we could talk about like some of his defensive struggles, but MVP offensive numbers this year getting shut down early as a result. You wonder the wear and tear that has on a guy. And we have like in our KFS, our Knicks Film School group chat, we have had discussions about whether it's the rational thing for Dallas to do, or they should have fully leaned into a tank sooner because the Knicks have their pick. And while I can understand if you're just playing the calculated math of it all, I mean, you're confirming what my suspicions were. Like, you don't know what that does to Luka. Like a guy that's a top 10 guy, for you to tell him with like 15 whatever so games, like, listen, we're not getting any higher than like 6th or 7th this year. We don't think this is the year. We're going to shut you down and completely tank. And then maybe he takes stock in that going forward. And I don't know, you got to keep your guys happy. And I think that's where we are with this point, at least from my perspective, with this, where we are with Dallas. It's just, you really need to make sure this guy feels happy with his situation in the player empowerment era. Is that a fear? I mean, this is a question I have to ask because the Knicks have this treasure trove of assets and will eventually go superstar hunting in the future. But like, is there a fear both within the organization and in the fan base that like we're messing with like a generational player's prime and his potential mood swing to one day eventually ask out?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of anxiety about it. I would say I think there's been anxiety before his Supermax even started because there was a big run last year, obviously with the Western Conference Finals, and it's like what I feel like once you have that success, you're like we're this close, and then to not even make the play in like that potentially, obviously, like because we have to see how these last two games for OKC play out and for Dallas, or last game for OKC. But like that's still, even if you get the spot, that's like that's such a fall from like where they were. And I know there's a lot of context people could say where it's like, oh well, they traded for big trade midseason. It was already a tight race and all that stuff, injuries, all that's great. But it's like I feel like you should have had a more stable team construction to where you can kind of insulate yourself from those sort of like downfalls, if you will, and not like wear Luka out earlier in the year. And then when he starts to reflect on the year, the first thing that's going to be brought up is, well, the workload was heavy, like very heavy early on. That became a problem. And then they made this trade for a soon to be free agent. And, it was a great basketball idea, like another superstar. He, when they play together, aside from some clutch situations where it's naturally going to need to have some chemistry building, it's worked. But the rest of the team wasn't ready. Like they gutted out their last piece defensively. Like their only like higher level on ball guy, like defensive guy, and like low man, all that stuff. Like he was kind of the glue that kept the defense together. It was already declining, but you get my point. Like like they didn't have the pieces ready, and they didn't make a subsequent move where it's like, all right, now we have Kyrie. Let's move what other pick we can move to get another piece. And then maybe that's enough for us to at least, be respectable in this playoff race heading into the off season with whatever else we need to do as well. So I think it's definitely going to be something that they're going to have to be very urgent about. Even Mark Cuban in his comments was like, nobody ever says, we're safe with the star. Like Giannis until they win. And like Giannis, even the whole talk was like, where's he going to go until they won a title? But then it's like that's true. But so like the clock's really, really ticking. So like Tim McMahon earlier, not to keep rambling, but like earlier in the year, Tim McMahon, before they made this Kyrie Irving trade, he said that, he sees a 2-year window for Luka, and summer of 2024 will be very important. And, with him getting closer to being done with this deal that he's on, the Supermax. And, like not making the play in the summer before that pivotal summer is pretty, concerning. So they're pretty strapped on assets as well and bad contracts. So who knows what they'll be able to do? I don't really see a lot of options, but I'll definitely tip my cap if they get a lot done. Pulling out of a hat for sure.
And look, from a New York perspective, the way Brunson's played, I don't want to call it conclusive ruling of the Porzingis trade from 2019, but like to see what ended up happening as a result of that trade, like Dallas then sold low on him, and look at the season he's having. And then you add in that it may lead to them getting the 11th pick in the draft this year. It couldn't have worked out better. And I am then going to assume on the opposite side, it couldn't have worked out worse for the way this season has gone. I do have a Kyrie question I've said some things about Kyrie especially when he was in Brooklyn, and I'm just gonna.
Well, he said some things about y'all too. So
believe me. Well, so
y'all have to fire back.
I mean, to be completely honest, it's so much less to do about Knicks Nets and way more to do about some other things that Kyrie might have said on his Twitter account. But keeping it basketball, it's funny. You want to make the jokes about him going to another team and it completely falling apart. But like, he's been outstanding. He's averaging 27, 5 and 6 on, I just looking at the numbers today, it was absurd. 51, 39 and 95% from the line. Like, that's not part of the problem. If anything, he's been an upgrade to Jalen Brunson on the offensive end with probably about the same amount of defense that you've gotten. And there's just, like you said, some chemistry issues that you have to figure out. And you kind of need to surround those guys, like you also said, with some guys that can play defense, and you plug up the holes that way instead. What have you seen from Kyrie? I've actually like admired your interview questions that you post. Like, you actually ask basketball questions that get him engaged and really get some thoughtful answers out of him. And like that, I think is just what he wants to do, is just answer basketball questions, not the drama that sometimes he has a hand in causing. Just from like the behind the scenes and some of the things we don't see, like do the Mavericks like him? Has he had a positive impact like off the court as a result of going there and interacting with these guys, especially with the level of offense that he's played with this season?
Yeah, I definitely think I'm actually working on gathering some quotes, from guys like at shoot arounds and locker room access availabilities and all that stuff. And I've asked a lot about their the experience playing with Kyrie Irving. And I know people are going to be positive while you're playing with a guy. Like there's not probably going to be like, this guy's awful, I can't stand playing with him. But it's all positivity. Even Jaden Hardy, the rookie, he typically doesn't give like lengthy answers. He's normally pretty to the point. But he gave me some really interesting answers about Kyrie. Him being a leader, speaking up in the locker room. Basically trying to rally the team whenever things aren't going well. Which, I mean, since All-Star break, sounds like he's had about as heavy of a workload in that department as Luka had early in the season. So it's been a lot of positivity. I think especially the leadership by example stuff is pretty important as well too. Like, he's out on the court super early. Before games, he's always doing extra work at the practice facility. That means a lot for someone like Jaden Hardy to be able to watch, and just raises the level of expectation, I think, around the whole team. Excellence, kind of if you're further away from excellence that's inside your own building, you want to get a little closer to that. Is basically my thought on that. So I think he's been very nice and respectful in the media stuff as well too, which, I mean, that doesn't really matter as long as you're not causing problems. Well, it doesn't matter too much. But yeah, from top down, I think it's been a positive experience. And as we said, the roster concerns are probably the main issue, because some of these lineups that they were putting out there from the start, they're undersized 3 through 5, no rim protector. And if you really think about what makes a great defense, you need probably a rim protector. You probably need a guy who's going to communicate on the back end, making those low man rotations, all that stuff. And you need an on-ball stopper. Well, they have nothing that resembles any of those things at all. And then you wonder why, with other teams that do, why you're worse than them, defensively. So I think that's probably the main issue. And then, if they had a full training camp, as he always likes to say, they could have worked through some of those, clutch time chemistry issues or things of that nature. So I think that's probably the main gist of the overall situation for sure.
Yeah, the Kyrie experiences seem to go a lot better in Dallas than it was, at least toward the end, in Brooklyn. And that's just that's what I was going to say. I danced around it as I awkwardly asked that question, but Kyrie Irving, the leader that he's kind of emerged being in that locker room, for what the reporting has been and some of the reading that I've done of player quotes, as you mentioned. And I don't know, maybe it's a perfect fit for him to be in Dallas with Luka. And, I'm curious to see what he does this offseason. And that's where I now ask you, do you have any idea what he's going to do this offseason?
Honestly, I think probably not. I think the best indication will probably come from when they talk money, since they're not really able to get into beyond that 2-year extension. conversation. I know in the NBA, sometimes some teams, specifically that reside in New York, may talk about contract details a little too early in terms of the legal deadline.
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you're talking about. They talked on the first night of free agency at 6 p.m. He didn't even talk to his dad until that moment.
Some people are just quicker with airdrop than others.
Yeah. Hey, Dad, can you pass the salt and $106 million in restricted free agency? Just casual conversation.
For sure. But yeah. I think definitely the numbers would probably have a lot to do with it, because if like Mark Cuban, not to keep bringing up those comments, but yesterday he did say, basically someone asked him, do you think Kyrie Irving is a max player? And then he, there wasn't like a I'm not going to negotiate with you, is essentially like what it was. I don't like, there's a lot of CBA got brought up and all that stuff. It's there's a kind of a interesting way to answer that question. When some people who are gonna, if you're not going to hesitate to give a full max, which I'm not saying there shouldn't be any hesitation or whatever. I don't run the team, so I'm not an expert on it. But if you're not going to hesitate on it, I would think that you would at least be he's a max player. He's an all-star starter, but we'll come to that whenever we have these discussions. I know that kind of eliminates your leverage a little bit, but I mean, so does trading for an all-star midway through the year, who's soon to be a free agent, when you just lost a guy like Jalen Brunson the year before. I feel like you don't really have a whole lot to work with. I think the situation's pretty clear that you're in a corner in a sense.
So last question. Well, I guess it's a two-part question, but I'll ask them separately. It's obvious what the disaster is if Dallas wins out and OKC wins out, because then you end up outside the play-in and you end up currently 11th. That's where you finish in the standings, the lottery standings, and then you're basically praying to the lottery gods for some fortune. So that's the obvious scenario. Again, Chicago has Dallas and then Detroit to wrap up this season. Dallas, they have San Antonio at the end of the season. So them winning out, Chicago at least losing one to Dallas would go a long way toward this scenario. And then OKC has this Memphis game. I have no idea who's going to play for Memphis in that game with the 2 seed locked up. So it's very reasonable to assume OKC wraps things up on Sunday. So that reality being presented is a realistic scenario and obviously a disaster. How much does what the Knicks do, as we relate the Knicks into this conversation somewhat, does that have any bearing on how big of a disaster it is? Does the Knicks' success with Jalen this season add to what a disaster the Dallas situation has been this year?
I think it definitely does, because that's the first instinct. Is it's Jalen was a big chemistry guy in the locker room. He's a winner everywhere he's gone. And when you start to see you don't really see issues with the Knicks. He's a stabilizer. You see they're sitting in 5th, if I remember correctly, in the East, and you're
locked
11th.
into a rematch with Donovan Mitchell in the first.
Yeah. You start to see that guy impacts winning a lot. And we would to have players or could have kept players that impact winning a lot as well. Not saying that Kyrie Irving doesn't or anything, but it's if you would have had him at a great price, and you could have just kept the chemistry rolling, I'm sure that would have been the ideal outcome instead of having to make a midseason trade for somebody else. It's also a momentum blow, I guess, in a sense, when you're building a team, because you have a situation where you brought in a draft class that was remarkable. He came in with Luka, and that's a success you can point to and have confidence in and be we brought 2 guys in at the same time. One was, a later pick, and, we'll just keep adding pieces to this. And, we don't have to trade one of our key guards in our rotation and our, another locker room guy who's important for us on the wing, to be able to replace the guy that we brought in with that later pick. That was a success story. I think that's that's kind of a tough thing to kind of navigate when you're starting to create holes to plug some that should have been handled, in my opinion. So I think it definitely is a negative when you're seeing what the Knicks are accomplishing And, you could have just, if you took care of business in house, perhaps, like a little sooner, perhaps you could have, been more consistent and successful yourself this season.
Yeah, you mentioned the Knicks like haven't had many problems. Even the ones that have risen up, they get squashed almost immediately. Like Obi Toppin and RJ Barrett had a moment in the Cleveland game last Friday where they got into it. RJ missed Obi on a lob. They got into it in the huddle. They squashed it before time even resumed. Julius Randle got into it with Emmanuel Quickly, trying to be held off from attacking a referee, and Quickly was like, come on, what are you doing? You're getting a technical foul. And Julius got in his face, and it became this big story. The Knicks haven't lost the game since that moment. Now, Julius got hurt in game 2 of this 5-game winning streak, but the point being, every single thing that we're so trained in New York to be like, oh, here's the thing that leads to like the end of the season it's been squashed immediately, and it's been followed by winning, which is a new concept. And look, Julius Randle's going to make he made the All-Star team. He's going to make an All-NBA team. Jalen Brunson is the most important player that this franchise has and has acquired in arguably their franchise's history. Trades, you probably go to Melo, but as far as free agency is concerned, he's arguably the biggest free agent signing that they've ever had. And I understand it's at the expense of Dallas, which leads to my last question. The disaster of losing Brunson last offseason, if it's followed by losing Kyrie, I just like, what's the move? So part of that is like, are there wholesale changes that gonna need to be done, like a GM change, a coaching change, and maybe a roster overhaul this offseason? Or does bringing Kyrie back at least like add some stability in that, okay, now we just build around this?
Yeah, I do think if you can bring him back, that definitely adds some stability. And at least they go into the offseason saying, like, we left some potential on the table because this was a midseason move. Like, now we can plug holes. Now we know what we need to improve. But if he leaves, like, I think there definitely would need to be some changes there because, the big swing, that's tough to make. And then, you're already like strapped on assets, and to have someone walk out the door, if that were to happen, like that would be a major problem. Like, I don't really know what else the situation was, because you got Kyrie Irving if you're the Mavericks, mostly because of the distressed asset, in a sense. You could say like not other teams were really lining up to make a big trade. You only had to move one future pick. Like if he would have had full trade value, if we never had any sort of controversial situations ever with Kyrie Irving, like I don't even know what type of trade package would be sent out for a guy like that. So like how many situations are you going to find where you're like, okay, like we have enough to make this happen, but then that's also your last move. Like you don't really have other picks until depending on this, lottery pick this year, like if it conveys or not, like that kind of changes it as well, like what you can send out. But still, right, like you don't really have like the war chest. Like some of these teams that have been, patient and, building, like stacking up picks like Oklahoma City and all, like they're already like teetering along the line of maybe being ahead of you in the play-in. Like I know that that's a very tough situation, because then soon they're going to be a team that's like, hey, like we have all these picks. We have Chet Holmgren coming back from injury. Like they can outbid you. Like not every team's going to have the same target, but like a lot of these teams will be able to outbid you pretty comfortably. And then it becomes a matter of like an oddly specific circumstance having to go in your favor. And I don't really feel like that's the position you want to be, obviously, when you're like, we need to keep Luka Doncic. That sounds very challenging, and also why I'm not an NBA GM.
And it's why I'm very obviously fascinated by what happens in Dallas. And look, I appreciate you coming on to help me preview a game that doesn't involve the Knicks and kind of give Knicks fans an idea of just like what's happened in Dallas this season. I want them to win out, but that's the craziest part about this season. It's like, I do actually mean good luck tonight, but in the sense that it only translates into the Knicks getting the 11th pick in the draft. The two games that the Knicks played the Mavericks this season were such crossroad moments for them. The first one, we thought Tibbs was getting fired the next day. and they're on a 58 win pace since that game, with a game at the Garden, the matinee where Tim Hardaway Jr. was going off and Luka was going off in that third quarter. And then obviously the 60-point Luka game where the Knicks blew a 9-point lead with 35 seconds. And it's a 1 in 13,884 scenario that you actually lose that game. Yes, I have that number memorized. So yeah, the spin zone of those 2 wins actually being important for the Mavericks to help the Knicks get the 11th pick are the most fascinating part about this interaction that New York and Dallas have had this season. So we'll see what happens. I guess I can actually say this. Usually at the end of these pods, I tell my guest, I don't wish you luck because you're the Knicks opponent. Good luck tonight, actually. Go Mavs. I'm very much rooting for your team to win a game. Before you get out of here, Grant, thank you so much for giving me your time. Please plug what you'd like to before you get out of here.
Yeah, we'll have a lot of coverage of, throughout the offseason of, the Kyrie Irving experience, whatever that may be, him staying, him leaving. We'll have full coverage of that on DallasBasketball.com. And normally I would go in depth and, go crazy with X's and O's about whoever they're playing in the playoffs like I did last year. But yeah, I think they're trying to give me a workload reduction, load manage me by missing the playoffs. So I'll spin it that way. But yeah, we'll have a lot of off-season coverage that's going to happen very quickly, probably pretty soon if they don't have everything go in their favor in these next couple of days for sure. But then again, as we talked about, what exactly is their favor? So we'll see. Either way, we'll write articles.
We shall see. Grant, thank you so much for joining me, man.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.